Please welcome to the program, Cheryl Strayed. How are you?
Hi.
Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, looking forward
I'm happy to be here.
Awesome. That's going to make a good conversation then. It is such an interesting thing to go through anything really difficult in your life and then to move on and then have to relive it over and over and over again. Mm-hmm. Is that what it feels like for you?
You know, it's interesting. It feels, as I've traveled all over talking to people about that journey I went on, so often what they're telling me is their story, their journey, the thing they recognized in the book. So it always feels kind of new to talk about it.
But invariably it has to go back to some horrible things in your life and real trials and tribulations.
Yes, that's true. That's true. It began really with my life's greatest loss, the death of my mother, who died suddenly at the age of 45 of cancer. And I do have to go back there. But you know, in some ways I feel like sharing her story and talking about her life and the love I have for her, it brings her back to me. So it's kind of a gift as well.
I suppose it would be in a way.
Yeah.
And it was that, I mean, you didn't have much of a relationship with your father at all.
No.
And your relationship with your stepfather deteriorated around then?
Uh-huh.
So in a way, did you feel like an orphan?
Absolutely, yeah. I really am an orphan. You know, my brother and sister and I had to figure out how to be in the world without parents. And I love my stepfather, and I always will, but he's really stopped being a father to me after my mother died. And so that has taught me a lot. And one of the things that this writing about this experience has taught me is how many of us there are. There's like a whole tribe of people out there who, for whatever reason, don't have parents. And some of the times it's mental illness or, you know, other situations. It's not always death.
The one thing that's so difficult for people to do, though, is to go away. To go away.
Yes.
And so you battle with your own reality and still have a job and still have a thing that you have to take care of. But in your situation, you just went away.
I did. I went into the wilderness.
It's like that old punk rock song. You went for a walk.
I did. You know, and I had grown up in the north woods of northern Minnesota, and I think that in so many ways, even though, you know, heading west to the Pacific Crest Trail was this foreign wilderness, it was also like going home. And I needed to do that, to go to a wild place that also felt like home to me.
Were you prepared for it?
No. I wouldn't say that. I would say...
How far in did you realize you weren't prepared for this?
Pretty quickly. You know, pretty quickly. Day one, I was in a motel room in this town called Mojave in California, and I brought all this stuff that I had bought to bring with me on my backpacking trip. I put it in my pack. I tried to lift my pack. I could not lift my pack. And right there was really a great awakening. What am I going to do? How do I bear this weight that I cannot bear? And so much of Wild is about that, how I did that on the inside, but also literally how I carried that pack, which got a nickname Monster, that it totally earned. How did I do that? How did I carry that over those 1,100 miles, or is it 1,800 kilometers? Yeah. And I really learned a lot through having to enact that physically.
Is this about getting stronger or letting yourself get erased for a while?
I think that those two things can live together. I think that I had to get to a place of disappearance or bottom before I could find my strength. And so much about that trip was me trying to figure out where my strength was and how I could find that given what I'd lost, which was a lot at that point.
You ingested your mother's ashes, partly?
I did. Do you think that's weird?
No, I don't, but I know that lots do.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a choice, right? In fact, it's a punchline for a Keith Richards joke. People say about his father, oh, he snorted his ashes or he smoked his father's ashes, right? And that was, when his book came out, that was the story. That it is a choice to do that.
Yeah.
And there's a cloud on you when you do that, right?
Yeah. Well, you know, what it was is, so my family and I had spread my mother's ashes in this plot of land that I grew up on in northern Minnesota, and there was just this little bit left. And I could not let go of my mother in the material world. It was just against, I mean, I couldn't do it. So I did what came naturally to me. And so many people have written to me to say, I did that too.
Wow.
And I remember when I wrote that line in Wild, I thought, you know, this is too weird. This is the line I'm going to have to delete in editing. And so often when you feel that's the place where you crossed a boundary of privacy, or you were too candid or too strange, is actually the place where people are going to identify and recognize themselves in your story?
The other downside to a memoir is that in this era, people don't trust them anymore.
That's right.
You know, and so a memoir is supposed to, I guess we just assume a memoir is the truth.
Yeah.
You know, you know that you've entered a marketplace where there is a distrust, especially something that touches so many people.
Yeah.
How did you feel about that, knowing this is the reality now?
Yeah, well, I think a lot of memoirists really feel sort of under scrutiny in that way. And there's this conundrum where I can tell you very truly that, you know, I tried really hard to not only tell the truth in terms of the facts, fact-checking what I could, but also really searching my soul. What is the true story of this experience for me? And I took that really seriously. There's nothing in the book that I decided to make up because it sounded better to do this versus that. On the other hand, I always wrote with this acute awareness that this is my story. You know, this is my subjective interpretation of what happened to me in the summer of 1995 and before. And so I wrote that with a great amount of compassion for the others I was writing about. You know, would my brother tell a slightly different story, or my sister, or anyone in the book? Probably. I will say that I'm really happy to report that nobody in the book objects to what I've written about them, even if sometimes what I wrote, as I said, was obviously through my perspective and my consciousness.
It's incredible how you face so many things that many people would be fearful of, and you got through them. You were honest about the fear, you got through them. Is there something now that scares you?
Well, you know, it's still startling to see a snake. In Wild, you know, there were several times people who've read the book know, you know, I'm walking along and there's a rattlesnake.
In Canada, in Toronto, most of the snakes are just in the TV business.
Yeah, no.
So we don't see them the way that you see them.
It still startles me. But, you know, even the snakes, I'm not that afraid of them. They don't want to hurt you. I'm afraid of, you know, now I'm a mom. All the things I'm afraid of are just about my children. Yeah. You know, I want them to be safe in the world, and for nobody to ever cause them harm or break their hearts or do any of the things that we know are going to happen.
When they start to explore this version of their mom, the one thing that we have about our moms, and in some cases for those who have dads, we don't know much about our parents' lives, and we actually, for the longest time, forget that our parents even had lives.
Yes.
You know, wins and losses, and they cried and they did all this other stuff. There's a whole part of you.
I know. And romantic lives, too, I think.
Right, yeah.
You know, before it really... So the question you're going to ask is, what do you think, what do I think my kids are going to make of this? Is that right?
How do you want them to take this?
I think my kids are really fortunate. Can you imagine having a book that your mother or father had written about his or her childhood and youth? I think that, of course, there are going to be scenes in the book that my kids will want to skim. Yeah. And because there is that parent-child boundary that is in place for good reasons. And I think that there will be things that disturb them, but I think that they're going to have a deeper insight into who I am as a human being. And they probably won't be ready to see that for quite some time. I'm thinking about they'll read it when they're like 34, 35.
So when you had written this book, did you sit there with your people and go, man, you know, if Oprah's book club was still around, wow, would this be big?
You know, I didn't ever even let myself think about that. What I did, honestly, is I wrote the best book I could write, just like the last book I wrote and the next book I'm going to write. And every book I will write throughout my whole life, I will write that best book I can write. And I don't think about who's going to love it, who's going to hate it, how it's going to be received, because you can't. You know, you can't predict these things. Nobody would have predicted that Wild would have had its life as it has, you know. And Oprah, too. I mean, the wonderful thing about, you know, she just called me up on my cell phone one day and said... Did
you be like, how did you get this number?
Yeah, no, the O magazine, her magazine, had done an interview with me, and she called that editor and said, what's Cheryl Strayed's cell phone number? And that editor handed it over. And my phone rang, and I said, hi, this is Cheryl. She said, hi, this is Oprah. And I paused and I said, it is. I recognized her voice. I mean, who wouldn't recognize Oprah's voice, right? So, but what was pretty amazing is really quickly, I was just talking to another person who'd read Wild and who really connected with it. And this experience has made me so much less cynical about what happens to a book in the world, because all of the good stuff that's happened for Wilde has been because somebody read the book and just liked it a lot. Yeah.
Well, we just relaunched the book club.
I relaunched the book club.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a big deal.
I know. Isn't that a big deal?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm stunned. And actually, when I met Oprah, what I said to her is, I was, of course, so grateful that she chose Wilde, but I really loved that I got the opportunity to thank her on behalf of writers, on behalf of literature, because she does bring so many readers to books that they might have otherwise not have seen or read.
Do you bounce drafts of this book off your other writer friends?
Yes, I'm in a writers group in Portland, Oregon, where I live. Yeah. And some of the members of my writers group are people you might know, the writer Chuck Palahniuk.
What's this?
Every Monday night, each of the people in my workshop, we bring in so many pages, and you have to read your pages out loud to hear how they work out loud. And then everyone sort of, figures out what works and what could work to better effect. And so, right now I'm coaching them on their self-help books, or their genre fiction, their thrillers, their romances. And then they've been coaching me on Brand.
Chuck Palahniuk, when he was on this show, talking about that writers group.
That's right. Yeah. That's the very same writers group, and he's right. We have, a thriller writer, a romance writer. We have different writers. Chuck and I, very different writers. I write literary memoir, literary fiction. And
well, if this was a Chuck book, if Wilde was a Chuck book, you would have taken the snake, you would have eaten it, then it would have eaten you.
That's right.
And then it would continue to eat itself, and then it would molt and start over.
That's right. And I should say, one of the funny sort of running jokes with Chuck, every time I would bring a scene in from Wilde, he'd say, well, I think it would be better if, like, the guys, like the two guys, actually, that there was this sort of homosexual sort of tension between them. And I would say, well, I can't do that because that's not true. That's not what really happened. It's a memoir. He'd say, that doesn't matter. It's just all for the story.
Right.
So if Chuck ever writes a memoir,
right,
just, maybe...
I just assumed Fight Club was a memoir. I just assumed it was. But there it is, right? It's what's the most important thing, the truth or the story?
Right,
and
that's right.
And sometimes they're different, right?
And sometimes, and that's it, my next book is probably going to be a novel. I mean, I think I'll always go back and forth between those two. And real life informs fiction. And of course, the skills one uses in fiction writing inform memoir writing. But they have slightly different rules.
Sure. Okay, answer this as honestly as you can, because I know I know the answer could be the correct answer, but the proper answer. It is one thing to write a book and then write another book. But to follow up a book like this in this sense, that carries a different pressure, doesn't it?
I think so, probably. Right. There will be a lot of people waiting for that next book, right? And so, are you saying...
I'm just wondering.
Am I terrified of that? What I think is, as I said, when I wrote Wilde, I wasn't thinking, I'm going to write a bestseller. I was thinking, I'm going to write the best book I can write. Right. And so that's what I'm going to do with my next book. And I probably, I can say, I wouldn't be surprised if it's not as successful as Wilde, because what's happened with Wilde is sort of beyond, it doesn't normally happen to a book.
Is Reese Witherspoon going to play you? I heard she just bought the rights.
Reese Witherspoon bought the rights before Wilde even came out.
Before it came out.
She was the first person in Hollywood to read the book back in November. And
how did that happen? How does the book get to her?
It's so funny. I got a film agent, like, one day, and that day when she called me and said, I want to be your film agent, she said, I know Reese's manager, and Reese would love to read your book over the weekend. Is that okay? I said, sure, that's fine with me. Monday, she called and said she loved the book and she wanted it. So that happened just very quickly.
That's incredible.
And Lisa Cholodenko, the director of The Kids Are All Right and Laurel Canyon and High Art, is directing Wilde the movie and writing the script. And the plan is to shoot it next summer. Now,
here's the thing. Every screenwriter, every producer will tell you that the only thing that matters in a film is the story, and the truth always secondary. And no matter, even if it's based on real events, knowing how much attention to detail you put into making sure this was honest, you're going to have to relinquish some of that in the film. How do you feel about that?
Well, I'm thinking as long as they allow me to do a cameo and the love interest is George Clooney.
What if they write the homosexual tension in, and then it's a completely different tone?
Well, there's a reason that oftentimes films will say this is based on the book.
Right.
I mean, I don't know. That's going to be an interesting question, actually. I haven't read the script yet, but when I read that script, if I see that there are elements that are indeed fictional, how will we address that in terms of I do think that I would only feel comfortable if somehow the audience were made aware of that. Right. That some things were altered, you know, for the film. Because, of course, I think a lot of people will be watching it as if it's the story of this hike that I actually took.
Absolutely.
And yeah, Reese, she's not playing someone named Jane, she's playing someone named Cheryl Strayed.
Right, it's you.
Which is really, that's my life.
Right.
Yeah,
that's
so
bizarre.
I care very much about it. And thankfully, I had breakfast with Reese and Lisa back in April, and they both seemed to really care, too. They seemed to get it, so.
Tell me, what, if I show you a picture of this particular Alice, what do you think? What does she mean to you?
Oh.
That's Alice Munro.
I know.
Yeah.
Of course I know.
No, I figured you knew.
Yes.
For them.
For them.
On the off chance you're like, hey, who's that?
Alice Munro.
Yeah.
She means so much to me. She was, I really think of her as my most important mentor, even though I've never met her. I've been in a room with her, I've seen her read. But I learned so much from her writing. I grew up in rural northern Minnesota, a couple generations apart from her. But when I read her books, especially her early work, which is set in southern Ontario, I felt like she was my people, and those people she wrote about, that community, that's the community I grew up in. Northern Minnesota is a lot like southern Ontario. Absolutely. You know, there's really no difference, except you guys have health care. But, yeah.
We sure do.
That's right.
And you have guns, it's different,
that's right?
Yeah,
exactly.
One feeds the other.
But so you know, when we were talking earlier about people recognizing themselves in my work, I recognized myself in Alice Munro's work. And so she means a lot to me. When I was 23 and got my first story published, I sent it to her. I was an audacious kid. And she wrote me back almost immediately. She wrote me the most amazing letter. I wrote an essay called Monroe Country, in which that letter is reprinted. And I write all about my regard for her. Right. She's been so important to me.
It's incredible. Well, the thing is that I think, you know, your book and her works and others, you make the reader feel like they're not alone. That there are others like them, and most people just struggle with that loneliness anyway.
Right.
So I think that's what Wild did for a lot of people. Stick around, more with Cheryl right after this.
Thank you. Thank you.
Remember when people were content to be unambitious, they'd sleep till 11, and just hang out with their friends? I mean, they had no occupations whatsoever, maybe working a couple hours a week at a coffee shop.
Right? I thought that died out a long time ago.
Not in Portland. Portland is a city where young people go to retire.
Portlandia. That's a scene, early scene from the first in Portlandia. People who live there don't promote it, but they sure seem to love it. Is that accurate? It's the place where young people go to retire?
Well, you know, it's funny. We love it, and we are also a little uneasy about it because, you know, there are certain parts of it, it's so funny, and it really does touch some truths, you know. I will say, my family and I, we bicycle around a lot. We you know, practically know the names of the chickens we buy at the, you know, at the local market. You know, we demand the, you know, everything be organic and sustainable, right, and all of those good things. And it can be a little bit comical sometimes. Yeah.
It's like, oh my God, we're stereotyped.
Exactly.
Oregon or Oregon?
Oregon.
Good job.
Oregon. Oregon.
What's the one movie you can't stop watching if it's on TV? See, for me, it was Chuck's Fight Club. Whenever Fight Club was on, no matter where it was in the film, it was like, well, we're not going out. And I'd be like this. Is there one for you?
Well, you know, The Wizard of Oz, isn't that just like the best film ever?
It's a pretty classic film.
And you know, I have little kids, and so whenever it's like, and then I get sucked in because I think, well, they're going to watch it. But it's such a great film.
A lot of my friends who have kids, though, now hate the things they used to love because their kids make them play it over and over and over and over again.
Yeah.
And also, kids generally have shitty taste in art.
Yeah.
You know?
Oh my goodness.
Your kids
no, but the kids have exposed me. Yeah. Now suddenly my kids just have discovered like pop music and hip hop. My kids are 6 and 8, and so I'm listening to some embarrassing music, some pop songs I would.
Like what?
Well, and what happened is I've now love it too. And it's not so embarrassing, it's just like not my thing.
Right.
Lady Gaga, they're big fans of Lady Gaga.
So what did you used to like though? Is this a...
Well, like I'm a like sort of Lucinda Williams,
right,
you know, Bob Dylan, you know, that kind of, you know, stuff.
This is way different.
But they're, yeah, we close the blinds and dance around to Lady Gaga.
It's because no one wants to see, you're like...
That's right, well, just in case, yeah.
Well, listen, what was the worst rejection you ever got as a writer?
Gosh, you know, so many times, I think that a couple of times when I've given something to a friend who's been begging me, I want to read your work, I want to read your work. And this was early on in my career. I've learned now, never give anyone your work. You know, if they want it, they can go to the store and buy it.
Right.
Because what happens is when you gift it to somebody, you have an expectation. Oh, they really want it. And then sometimes they won't read it or they'll say something kind of callous, and it can be really personally hurtful.
Right.
So I sort of learned to just, if you want to read my book, go get it in the bookstore.
Have you cut friends off?
No.
No? Do you ever want to?
Yes.
If heaven was a waiting room or had a waiting room, what's the one magazine you hope they have? You can't say, oh.
I can't say, oh. Let's see. You know, I must say probably the New Yorker, because it's just got these amazing essays in there all the time.
Plus, if you're in a heaven waiting room, you've already won.
That's right.
You're getting in.
Exactly.
That's all right. What do you miss most about Minnesota?
The snow and like cross-country skiing in the winter and ice skating, and then just that feeling of it really being winter. It's also the thing I miss the least.
Right, exactly.
So it's like this.
Were you a hockey fan in Minnesota as a kid? I mean, it's everywhere, right?
Yeah, I mean, where I went to high school, it wasn't so much hockey. Basketball was that big winter sport.
Were you a good basketball player?
I was a basketball cheerleader.
Oh my God. A good one?
Captain of the team.
Wow.
I could do the splits. I won't try that now, but
I've seen documentaries about cheerleading, like Bring It On. Were you in that kind of like really intense, mean, crazy cheerleader captain? Fighting other schools?
No. I just grew up in this little tiny town.
There was no rivalries?
We just had pom-poms. You know, I grew up like out in the country with animals and everything, and I had these big pom-poms, and I put them in my bedroom and took them to school one day, and I realized they reeked of cat pee. My cat had peed on the pom-poms.
That's like my hockey
Not
equipment.
Good.
Speaking of animals, would you rather fight a shark with a sword or a bear with a spear?
Oh, a bear with a spear any day. Yeah. I don't want to go up against a shark. That's not my world, that water stuff.
Venue.
At least with the bear, we're on land.
Right. Venue is a really key part of that question.
It is.
Yeah. What's the hardest Trivial Pursuit pie piece to get?
Well, you know, I think it must be science, because I'm a writer after all. I was an English major, you know?
We go into English because we can't get into science.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
Have you ever let the elevator door close on someone while you pretended to hit the open button? You know when you're in an elevator, hey, wait, and you're just like...
I have never even thought of doing that.
Really?
Yes.
Well, good.
I'm just amazed you even could come up with that question.
Listen, a story of survival. Who knows who's coming in the elevator, right? It's totally possible. Could be a bad person. Lennon or McCartney?
Oh, Lennon.
Do aliens exist?
No.
How glad are you to have known this world pre-internet?
Really glad. Really glad. How old are you?
I'm 40. I'm pre-internet too.
So you barely, I mean, but no, I mean.
I was 20 when I got my first computer when I was 22, 23. So I grew up with it.
Aren't you so glad?
Yeah.
You didn't, I mean, I didn't know, I didn't really have it until I was like in my early 30s. And I'm just mortified to think if I'd spent my teen years and 20s blathering on about myself on Facebook and the different trials and tribulations, you know? Yeah. I mean, it's bad enough that I do that now.
Do you update your own social networking?
Yes.
You do?
You know, that's the thing is I haven't gotten used to all this stuff yet. I still do everything myself.
It's good though. You want to.
Yeah.
Your own Twitter posts?
Yeah, all the time. I'll go and tweet about this.
You better.
I will.
That is wild. If you haven't read it, you really need to. Cheryl Strayed, everybody. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
It's really a pleasure. It was really fun to talk to you.
Absolutely, yeah. I really am an orphan. You know, my brother and sister and I had to figure out how to be in the world without parents. And I love my stepfather, and I always will, but he's really stopped being a father to me after my mother died. And so that has taught me a lot. And one of the things that this writing about this experience has taught me is how many of us there are. There's like a whole tribe of people out there who, for whatever reason, don't have parents. And some of the times it's mental illness or, you know, other situations. It's not always death.
The one thing that's so difficult for people to do, though, is to go away. To go away.
Yes.
And so you battle with your own reality and still have a job and still have a thing that you have to take care of. But in your situation, you just went away.
I did. I went into the wilderness.
It's like that old punk rock song. You went for a walk.
I did. You know, and I had grown up in the...
But over and over and over again. Is that what it feels like for you?
You know, it's interesting. It feels, as I've traveled all over talking to people about that journey I went on, so often what they're telling me is their story, their journey, the thing they recognized in the book. So it always feels kind of new to talk about it.
But invariably, it has to go back to some horrible things in your life and real trials and tribulations.
Yes, that's true. That's true. It began really with my life's greatest loss, the death of my mother.
Please welcome to the program, Cheryl Strayed. How are you?
Hi.
Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming to the show.
Thank you for having me.
I'm looking forward to
I'm happy to be here.
Awesome. That's going to make a good conversation then. It is such an interesting thing to go through anything really difficult in your life and then to move on and then have to relive it.
Who died suddenly at the age of 45 of cancer. And I do have to go back there. But you know, in some ways I feel like sharing her story and talking about her life and the love I have for her, it brings her back to me. So it's kind of a gift as well.
I suppose it would be in a way.
Yeah.
And it was that, I mean, you didn't have much of a relationship with your father at all.
No.
And your relationship with your stepfather deteriorated around then? So in a way, did you feel like an orphan?